Okay, let's dive into a really fascinating and complex story. It's a case where the most important piece of evidence isn't a weapon or a document, but a dictionary.
So, how exactly does sharing something online lead to a prison sentence? Well, this explainer gets into the weeds of a case involving a PhD physicist, and it uncovers a story that, believe me, goes way beyond just a simple courtroom drama.
First things first, let's meet the man at the center of all this, Dr. Chen Jinyuan. He's a physicist, a scholar with a PhD in complex systems theory. He calls himself an independent researcher, and he's got interests all over the map, from physics to philosophy. And in 2023, things took a very serious turn. He was sentenced to 1 year and 8 months in prison. 20 months. So, what was the official charge? It was for picking quarrels and provoking trouble. Now, this is a notoriously broad and, kind of vague offense. And it was all for his activity on social media platforms that were based overseas. Right, so what was the court's actual reasoning for this? Let's break down the official verdict and see what they said. The court's final ruling pretty much laid down a clear marker. They said, look, the internet isn't some kind of Wild West. It emphasized that everything you do online, from making a post to just sharing one, falls under the same legal rules as your actions in the real world. So the prosecution's case really boiled down to these key points. They said that Dr. Chen used special software to get on overseas networks. And once he was there, he spread what they called false information, including stuff that attacked the state. But here's the kicker. They argued that all of this led to serious chaos and really messed with social order. But that's not the end of the story, not by a long shot. Dr. Chen actually filed an appeal right from his detention center, arguing that the whole verdict was just flawed, both in its facts and its logic. And in his appeal, he basically took their whole argument apart, piece by piece. For instance, he said, hey, there's absolutely zero evidence of any actual public chaos. He also pointed out that to be guilty of this crime, you need two things. You have to knowingly spread lies, and you have to cause real disorder. He argued neither of those things happened here. And this right here, this gets us to the absolute heart of the legal fight. It's a total head-to-head clash over the basic facts and, maybe even more importantly, the intent behind what he did. But what if this whole focus on legal facts and intent is kind of missing the point? Some analyses of this case suggests we might be asking the wrong questions entirely. What if the real battle isn't happening in a courtroom, but in the dictionary? This is where the story takes a really fascinating turn. It moves out of the world of law and into the philosophy of language. In fact, several sources put it just like that. They argue this whole thing is really a struggle over who gets to define words like crime, chaos, and even truth. So, the crucial idea here is that a crime wasn't just discovered, it was constructed. And the building blocks they used to construct it? Language itself. To really get our heads around this, we're going to need to pull out a philosopher's toolkit and unpack a few key ideas from the 20th century. Okay, first up, Wittgenstein's idea of a language game. Think about it like this. The word checkmate means something very specific in a game of chess, but it's meaningless if you're playing poker. The context, the game, is what gives the word its meaning. In this case, you could say Dr. Chen was playing an academic game of archiving and questioning, but the court was playing a totally different legal game, and it slapped a rigid definition of trouble onto his words, completely stripping them of their original context. All right, next up is something called speech act theory from J.L. Austin. It sounds academic, but the idea is simple. Words don't just state things, they do things. When you say, I apologize, you're actually performing the act of apologizing. Now, the prosecution made a huge logical leap here. They took the simple act of Dr. Chen forwarding a post and said it was the same thing as the effect of disrupting public order. They completely skipped over his intent, which he said was just to save information for his research. Now, this next one is really interesting. It comes from the philosopher Frege and his ideas about truth. He basically argued that for a statement to be true or false, it has to connect to something real in the world that we can actually check. Like, if I say it's raining outside, you can go look. But the main charge against Dr. Chen, that he caused serious chaos, was never backed up with any real observable evidence. There were no riots, no mass panic. So because you can't verify it, the charge becomes logically empty. Philosophers would call that a pseudo-proposition. So, what does all this mean when we put it together?
This table does a great job of tying the whole philosophical critique together. Check it out. Across these different dimensions, you can see how the legal case just kind of falls apart under scrutiny. When it comes to meaning, you get semantic misuse. For action, it's a pragmatic fallacy. For truth, a pseudo-proposition. And finally, when you look at it through the lens of power, it becomes what a philosopher like Foucault might call discursive colonization, basically the takeover of language to use it as a tool of control. So, in the end, you're left with two completely different ways of looking at this whole thing. Is it a straightforward legal dispute about whether his actions broke a law? Or is it a much deeper battle over who has the power to define reality itself through words? And that's why one analysis concludes that with all the writing Dr. Chen has done from prison, he's not just defending himself. He's engaged in a kind of philosophical resistance, defending the freedom of language itself against what's being called a tyranny of meaning. So really, the big takeaway here is that this case is a powerful reminder that the big conflicts in our society aren't always fought with actions. A lot of the time, they're fought with definitions. Which leaves us with a pretty critical question to think about. When power gets to redefine words, what happens to truth?